Are you ready?
Yeah.
Yes!
This is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
Now, Ross Kaminsky.
Come on, man.
On Denver's talk station, 630
All right, good morning. It's Tuesday. I'm Ross. Thanks for starting your day with me. Obviously, a lot to do today. Still going to talk quite a bit about what's going on in Afghanistan. I do see a headline from CNBC from about an hour ago. Flights resume from Kabul airport as people scramble to leave Afghanistan. So, I had a conversation yesterday by phone, an actual conversation, not what passes for conversation among kids these days, which is a few text messages back and forth, but I actually spoke to a friend of mine who served in the Afghan military some years ago. He would be and would have been targeted for death by the Taliban back at the time. He has since moved to the United States of America a couple of years ago after serving his country, but his family remains in Afghanistan. So I was speaking to him yesterday and asking him what he knows, in particular of his parents, what's going on. And he said, look, what you have to understand is that people know who I am. People know who my parents are. And in their neighborhood, and of course, you know, you have these very widespread extended families in Afghanistan as well. He said, our neighbors, and even probably our cousins, extended family kinds of people, would gladly sell my parents to the Taliban in order to try to hurt me, is what he told me yesterday. And so his parents left their home. Oh, by the way, what they did the previous week, what his parents did the previous week was they went through their own home, finding any kind of stuff about their own son, pictures, a former military uniform that he had hanging in his closet at his parents' home, pieces of paper about their son, and burned them all. They went through and destroyed any remnant, any memory they had of their own son, not out of embarrassment, out of fear that the Taliban would walk into their house and see this stuff, and then who knows what would come next. So his parents left their home, as best as he can put this together right now, and started driving. They live on the south side of Kabul, started driving towards the airport, got about halfway, and saw a Taliban checkpoint just ahead of them. So apparently turned off and got to a friend's house somewhere, this person thinks. Not even 100% sure of that because he can't reach his parents. He's hoping that his parents can get to his sister's house, which is only about 2 miles from the airport. But then what? His parents didn't work with the United States. So far, they haven't been eligible for a visa. Although President Biden yesterday apparently put out an order to the State Department saying that the U.S. should do whatever they can to try to rescue not just people who work directly for the United States, but people who are likely to be killed by the Taliban because of, you know, whatever connections they have, either to someone who worked in the Afghan military, or someone who worked with the United States, or someone who worked for civil society organization. So who knows? But how do you even find them? How do you even get them? I mean, right now, the Taliban is basically controlling the city. Is the United States actually, is Joe Biden going to get a list of thousands of people who need rescuing and put American troops in Humvees and send them through Kabul? Is he going to be willing to get in firefights with the Taliban in order to save the people that Joe Biden, betrayed? I kind of doubt it. I've got some audio I want to share with you, and I'm going to share some of this over the course of the show. Comes from a few different people. And I'm going to save the Biden stuff for later. Joe Biden gave a speech yesterday in which he essentially defended the big picture strategic decision to withdraw, but without adequately answering for the utter catastrophe that's unfolding in front of us right now because of him. And we need to be very clear not to confuse the strategy with the execution. These are two different things. And you and I, like Dan Kaplis and I, might have a disagreement about whether the right strategy was to keep people there, keep a American presence there longer or not. That was what Joe Biden responded to yesterday, was that debate, but that wasn't the question at hand. The question at hand was, why are you going to kill so many people with your incompetence? As president of the Bad Analogy Club, I came up with a little something that I sent out on Twitter yesterday. Biden, I had to get my car back home. Police officer. Yeah, but did you have to get drunk and kill 3 people in the crosswalk while you were doing it? Biden. Well, Trump told me I had to get my car home. I mean, it's insane. Anyway, Biden's speech was... It just simply didn't answer the question at hand. Right? It was as if he was... It was almost a repeat of speech he gave back in July and previous speeches. It was almost a repeat of that stuff where he was commenting about the strategic decision to withdraw, and I don't want to put more, another generation of American military people at risk in a war that we can't win, yada, yada, yada. And again, okay, that's a debate that we had already and that we may again have in the future, but that's not what we're dealing with right now. So, as you know, because I like to know what all sides, not just conservatives on Fox News, are thinking, I flip around between stations a lot, and I ingest as much CNN and MSNBC as I can tolerate, especially MSNBC, because CNN, it's not just that they're liberal or whatever, it's just they're bad. And they just don't have very much to say. And I find it to be quite a waste of time, even from the perspective of trying to find out what other people are thinking, because there's so precious little thinking that goes on that network. MSNBC has more interesting conversations, even though their hosts are really far to the left. Anyway, Nicole Wallace, who is a mental midget of the first order, had this guy on, and I guess Brian Williams was there too because his show was next. And this guy's name is Matt Zeller, Zeller, and I am trying to get in touch with him to get him on the show. He's a former combat vet who has started a nonprofit whose mission is to make sure that we get everybody out, to protect these Afghan interpreters and so on. He's extremely passionate about it. And his conversation on MSNBC yesterday was an absolute must listen. And I want to share with you, we'll start with just one piece of audio of Matt Zeller yesterday. And it starts with Brian Williams, asking Zeller a question that, and Brian Williams' question just so perfectly exemplifies MSNBC. Matt Zeller's answer is, one for the ages.
I'm curious to hear your reaction of this consequential speech by the American president. Didn't run from it. He owned it. He owned his decision. He owned the fact that, as he put it, the buck stops with him.
I hope he gets to own their deaths too. I feel like I watched a different speech than the rest of you guys. I was appalled. There was such a profound, bold-faced lie in that speech. The idea that we planned for every contingency. I have been personally trying to tell this administration since it took office. I've been trying to tell our government for years that this was coming. We sent them plan after plan on how to evacuate these people. Nobody listened to us. They didn't plan for the evacuation of our Afghan wartime allies. They're trying to conduct it now at the 11th hour. The thing that they were most concerned about was the optics of a chaotic evacuation. Well, they got exactly what they were most concerned of by failing to do what was right when we could have done it.
I'll tell you what, if I could have reached through the screen and slapped Brian Williams, I would have. I mean, listen to this.
I'm curious to hear your reaction of this consequential speech by the American president.
Okay, so first, in what way was it consequential? It really wasn't, actually. It was shockingly inconsequential for a moment that needed such a consequential speech. It did need a consequential speech. Joe Biden decided to leave his vacation in Camp David, grace us with his presence at the White House for a 20-minute speech or something, after which he answered. Guess how many questions he answered afterwards? That's an easy question. 0. And then he went back to Camp David. He says, we're monitoring it from there, right? But the speech was as inconsequential as you could imagine a speech would be, given this low moment in American history. So Brian Williams, this consequential speech. What do you think about this consequential speech? It wasn't.
Didn't run from it. He owned it. He owned his decision. He owned the fact that, as he put it, the buck stops with him.
Yeah, except when Biden's speech, he did say the buck stops with me, and he said, I stand by my decision. But he didn't address any of the chaos on the ground. Biden was just saying, I stand by my decision to withdraw America from Afghanistan, and the buck stops with me on that. But he didn't say that the buck stops with me with the fact that, as I mentioned on yesterday's show, that I feel like I'm watching a slow-motion terrorist attack. I feel like I am watching hundreds or thousands of desperate Afghans who are at the Kabul airport, which is now surrounded by Taliban. And these are people who, if they don't get out, will likely be killed. I heard something yesterday. I don't know if this is true. That there is a biometric database of Afghans who have worked with Americans. Fingerprints, retinal scans, I don't know. And that the Taliban have gotten their hands on it. And so when they get people, they check them against this database. And if these people have worked with the United States of America, you can imagine what will happen to them and their families and so on. I have not verified that. I heard that in a news broadcast yesterday. Anyway, I thought it was great when Matt Zeller said to Lion Brian, I must have listened to a different speech than you did. And, Brian Williams says that Joe Biden owned it. He owned it.
I hope he gets to own their deaths too.
Yeah, exactly. And just to be clear, Matt Zeller is not saying he hopes people die. He's saying he hopes that if people die because of Biden's incompetence, that Biden gets blamed for it, because this is totally unnecessary. This is just a really remarkable thing. And where Matt Zeller was criticizing Biden for talking about planning for every contingency, this is something that really jumped out at me, too.
My national security team and I have been closely monitoring the situation on the ground in Afghanistan and moving quickly to execute the plans we had put in place to respond to every constituency, including the rapid collapse we're seeing now.
Does anybody believe that? Does anybody believe that they had prepared for every contingency, for any contingency, for this particular contingency that's happening right now? And Biden came out, we've played this audio quite a bit. Biden came out 5 weeks ago and said it was unlikely that the Taliban would be running the place anytime soon. But think about this for a second. Part of Biden's argument for getting out of Afghanistan is that the Afghan military wasn't fighting. And we can talk about all the reasons for that. A big part of the reason they weren't fighting was probably the quote-unquote peace deal, which was really more of just an American surrender deal that Donald Trump did with the Taliban. And when Trump had the Afghan government release 5,000 Taliban prisoners from Afghan prisons who could go back into the fight, you can imagine that a lot of the Afghan military was highly demotivated by the fact that the U.S. seemed intent on handing the country back to the Taliban. But anyway, part of Biden's argument for getting out of Afghanistan is that the Afghan military won't fight. So let's just take that as true. The Afghan military won't fight. For whatever reason right now, the Afghan military won't fight. So if your reasoning for getting out is that the military, their military won't fight, then how could you possibly have been surprised when their military didn't fight? How can you possibly have been surprised by the Taliban being able to move through the country and take control of the country much faster than you had previously said, if you actually believed, and you said you did, that the Afghan military wouldn't fight? It would have been entirely predictable, and in fact, it was predicted. I predicted it. Lots of people predicted it. How many times have I said on this show the Taliban is going to be in complete control of Afghanistan? It was obvious. And Biden's going to say that he planned for every contingency? Who's buying that? I got an email from a listener yesterday, a listener who I keep in pretty good contact with, and he said, Ross, you seemed pretty despondent yesterday, and I understand why I share that view, that feeling. And he was right, and I don't deny it. I said it on the air yesterday. I truly feel, and I'm trying to avoid coming across as sarcastic or, bad analogy guy on something that's important. I feel like I'm watching the planes about to hit the Twin Towers, knowing that it could have been stopped and somebody made an affirmative decision not to stop it. That's what I feel like is going to happen. All these civilians in Afghanistan, and the person who decided not to stop it was the president of the United States. This will go down in never-ending shame.
KHOW Denver, 630 KHOW, an iHeart radio station. Available everywhere on our free iHeart radio app. #1 for music, radio, and podcast.